The marble floors of the Grand View Hotel lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year, their light catching every speck of dust that dared to settle on surfaces polished to mirror perfection. The scent of expensive leather and fresh orchids mingled with the subtle aroma of wealth that seemed to emanate from the very walls of this establishment, where power brokers made deals over afternoon tea and where a single night's stay could feed a family for months. Marcus Thompson stood near the entrance, his clothes torn and stained from the car accident that had left him stranded on a deserted highway for 6 hours, his usually immaculate appearance now resembling that of someone society had forgotten. The contrast between his disheveled state and the opulent surroundings created a tension so thick it seemed to press against his chest like a physical weight. And as he approached the reception desk, he couldn't have known that the next few minutes would reveal truths about human nature that would change everything he thought he knew about dignity and judgment. If you've ever been judged by your appearance rather than your character, this story might echo something deep within your own experience. Stay with me, and perhaps share in the comments how you've overcome moments when the world seemed determined to diminish your worth. The receptionist, a young woman named Isabella Santos, whose nameplate gleamed as brightly as her perfectly manicured nails, looked up from her computer screen with the practiced smile that luxury hotels taught their staff to deploy like armor against the unpredictable nature of human interaction. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly when she took in Marcus's appearance, the mud-stained designer jeans that no longer looked designer, the torn shirt that had once cost more than her monthly salary, the exhaustion etched into features that spoke of a night spent walking through rain and darkness after his phone had died and his car had broken down in an area where cell towers were as rare as honest politicians. "And sir, I'm sorry, but I think you might be lost," Isabella said, her voice carrying the kind of polite condescension that service workers learned to wield when they wanted to remove undesirable elements without creating scenes that might disturb paying customers. "This is the Grandview Hotel, is the Grandview. Perhaps you're looking for the shelter downtown." Marcus felt the familiar sting of assumption, the way people's eyes could strip away years of achievement and reduce him to nothing more than the color of his skin and the current state of his clothes. He'd built a technology empire from nothing, had shaken hands with presidents and prime ministers, had donated millions to causes that lifted up communities forgotten by society's elite. But in this moment, standing in clothes that told a story of misfortune rather than success, he was just another black man who didn't belong in spaces that wealth had carved out for itself. Actually, I have a reservation," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the careful control of someone who'd learned to navigate these situations with dignity intact. "Marcus Thompson, Penthouse Suite." Isabella's fingers moved across her keyboard with the mechanical precision of someone going through motions they knew would prove futile, her expression suggesting that she was humoring a delusion rather than checking an actual reservation. The lobby around them buzzed with the quiet conversations of guests who belonged, their voices mixing with the soft jazz that played from hidden speakers and the gentle splash of the fountain that served as the room's centerpiece. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see any reservation under that name," Isabella said, though Marcus caught the brief flicker of surprise that crossed her features when his name actually appeared on her screen. "However, I'm afraid our dress code requires—" "Your dress code," Marcus interrupted gently, "doesn't apply to guests who've already paid for their accommodations, which I have, in full, for the next 3 nights. The computer screen told a story that Isabella's assumptions hadn't prepared her for, a reservation made 6 months in advance, paid for with a black card that required a credit limit most people couldn't fathom, with special requests that suggested someone accustomed to the finest accommodations money could provide. But the evidence of wealth and status on her screen seemed to war with the visual reality of the man standing before her, creating a cognitive dissonance that left her struggling to reconcile what she saw with what she knew. "Sir, even if you do have a reservation, I'm afraid I can't allow you to access the guest floors in your current condition. Perhaps you could return when you're more appropriately dressed." The words hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, carrying implications that went far beyond dress codes and hotel policies. Marcus felt the weight of every assumption, every stereotype, every moment in his life when people had looked at him and seen limitation rather than possibility. But he also felt something else stirring beneath the surface. Not anger, exactly, but a quiet determination to turn this moment into something more than just another story of prejudice and missed opportunities. "I understand your concern about appearances," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite the storm building in his chest. "Tell me, what's your policy when guests experience emergencies, when their luggage is lost, or when they're victims of circumstances beyond their control?" Isabella hesitated, her training warring with her instincts, her professionalism battling against assumptions that had been reinforced by years of working in an environment where wealth and worthiness were considered synonymous. "Well, we do have provisions for emergency situations, but you're choosing not to apply those provisions to me," Marcus finished, his words carrying no accusation, just a statement of fact that seemed to echo in the marble-lined space around them. "I'm curious, what exactly about my appearance suggests that I'm not capable of affording a $3,000 a night suite?" The question landed like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the lobby as other guests began to notice the conversation unfolding at the reception desk. Marcus could feel their eyes upon him, could sense the mixture of curiosity and discomfort that his presence created in a space designed to insulate wealth from the realities of the world beyond its gilded walls. Isabella's face flushed with the realization that her assumptions might have led her into territory that could cost her more than just embarrassment. "Sir, I apologize if I've given you the wrong impression. It's just that our policies—" "Your policies," said a voice from behind Marcus, sharp and cutting like a blade designed to draw blood, "are quite clear about the kind of clientele we serve here." Marcus turned to see Maria Gonzalez approaching, her supervisor's badge catching the light as she moved with the confident stride of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of exclusion disguised as customer service. Her eyes swept over Marcus with the practiced assessment of someone who'd made a career out of determining who belonged and who didn't, and her expression suggested that she'd already reached her conclusion. "Ma'am, I was just explaining to this gentleman about our dress code requirements," Isabella said, her voice carrying the relief of someone passing a difficult problem to a superior. "I can see exactly what's happening here," Maria said, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that others would implement without question. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. This is a private establishment, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't meet our standards." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable designed to wound and diminish, to reduce him to nothing more than an unwelcome presence that needed to be removed before it could contaminate the carefully curated atmosphere of exclusivity that the hotel worked so hard to maintain. But instead of anger, Marcus felt something else rising within him, a clarity that came from understanding exactly what he was dealing with and exactly how he intended to respond. "Your standards," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that seemed to fill the space around them. "I'm curious about those standards. Are they based on the color of someone's skin or just their current circumstances?" Maria's face hardened with the expression of someone who'd been challenged in ways she hadn't expected. "Our standards are based on maintaining the quality of experience that our guests expect. And frankly, your presence here is disruptive to that experience." "Disruptive," Marcus said, the word rolling off his tongue like a revelation. Yes, I suppose the truth often is disruptive, isn't it?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, its edges worn from the night's adventures, but its message still clear. Marcus Thompson, CEO, Thompson Technologies, with contact information that anyone in the business world would recognize as belonging to one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. He placed it on the marble counter between them, the small piece of cardstock seeming to carry more weight than its physical properties should have allowed. "I'll be back tomorrow," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a promise that seemed to resonate in the marble and crystal around them. "Agree, and when I return, I think you'll find that your standards may need some adjustment." He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the lobby like a countdown to something inevitable. Behind him, he could hear the whispered conversations of guests who'd witnessed the exchange, their voices carrying the mixture of shock and curiosity that came from seeing assumptions challenged and certainties questioned. The night air outside the hotel felt different somehow, cleaner and less oppressive than the atmosphere he'd just left behind. Marcus walked to the corner where he'd arranged for his driver to pick him up, his mind already working through the plans that would transform this moment of humiliation into something far more significant than a simple case of mistaken identity. 24 hours later, Marcus Thompson returned to the Grandview Hotel, but this time he arrived in a way that would ensure no one questioned his right to be there. The Rolls-Royce Phantom that pulled up to the hotel's entrance was the kind of vehicle that commanded attention even in a city where luxury cars were common, its midnight black paint reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror designed to capture and hold light. The car's presence seemed to alter the very atmosphere around the hotel's entrance, drawing stares from passers-by and causing the valet staff to straighten their postures and adjust their uniforms with the nervous energy of people suddenly aware that they were about to encounter someone of significant importance. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle wearing a suit that had been tailored by craftsmen whose waiting lists stretched for months, his appearance now matching the expectations that wealth and success created in spaces like the Grandview Hotel. But more than his clothes had changed, there was something different in his bearing, a quiet confidence that came from understanding exactly who he was and exactly what he intended to accomplish. The lobby fell silent as he entered, conversations stopping mid-sentence as guests and staff alike recognized that something significant was about to unfold. Marcus walked directly to the reception desk, where Isabella Santos stood frozen, her face pale, with the dawning realization that the man she'd turned away yesterday was not who she'd assumed him to be. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same quiet control it had possessed the day before, but now backed by the visual evidence of success that society demanded before it would listen to what someone had to say. "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." Isabella's hands trembled as she recognized him, her mind racing through the implications of what her assumptions had cost not just him, but potentially her career and the hotel's reputation. "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry about yesterday. There was clearly a misunderstanding." "Oh, there was no misunderstanding," Marcus said gently, his words carrying no anger but an unmistakable clarity about what had actually occurred. "You saw exactly what you expected to see, and you acted exactly as you were trained to act. The question now is what we're going to do about it." Maria Gonzalez appeared as if summoned by the tension in the air, her supervisor's confidence from the previous day replaced by the careful movements of someone who'd realized that they'd made a mistake with consequences they couldn't yet fully comprehend. Her eyes darted between Marcus and the growing crowd of onlookers, her professional composure cracking under the weight of understanding that this situation was about to become much larger than a simple customer service issue. "Mr. Thompson," Maria said, her voice carrying a forced brightness that couldn't disguise the fear beneath it. "Welcome back to the Grandview. I trust we can resolve any concerns you might have about yesterday's miscommunication." "Miscommunication," Marcus repeated, the word seeming to hang in the air like an accusation. "Is that what we're calling it?" When your staff assumed that a black man in torn clothes couldn't possibly belong in your establishment? When they suggested I might be better served by a homeless shelter? When they refused to honor a confirmed reservation because my appearance didn't match their expectations? The lobby had grown completely quiet now. Every conversation stopped, every eye focused on the drama unfolding at the reception desk. Marcus could feel the weight of their attention, could sense the mixture of discomfort and fascination that came from watching privilege and prejudice collide in real time. "Sir, I assure you that our staff receives extensive training in customer service and cultural sensitivity," Maria said, her words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "If there was any inappropriate behavior, there was," Marcus said simply. "And now we're going to address it. Not just for me, but for every person who might walk through those doors and face the same assumptions, the same prejudices, the same casual dismissal of their humanity based on nothing more than their appearance." He gestured toward the crowd that had gathered, their faces reflecting the complex emotions that came from witnessing a moment when society's carefully maintained facades were stripped away to reveal the uncomfortable truths beneath. "You see, everyone here is learning something important today. They're learning that wealth and worthiness aren't always visible, that dignity doesn't depend on designer clothes, and that assumptions can be not just wrong, but dangerous." Isabella had begun to cry, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her actions settled into her consciousness. "Mr. Thompson, please, I didn't mean... I was just following procedures. I never intended to hurt anyone." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been compassion, understanding that she was as much a victim of the system that had taught her to make these judgments as he had been a victim of her assumptions. "Isabella, isn't it? Tell me, what did you learn yesterday?" I learned that I was wrong, that I made assumptions based on how someone looked instead of who they were, that I let prejudice guide my actions instead of treating everyone with dignity and respect." "And what are you going to do differently in the future?" Isabella wiped her eyes, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "But I'm going to remember this moment every time I interact with a guest. I'm going to treat everyone with the same respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. I'm going to remember that everyone has a story, and that story might be completely different from what I assume." Marcus nodded, seeing in her response the possibility for genuine change rather than just empty promises designed to avoid consequences. "That's exactly right. And Maria, what about you? What systems are you going to put in place to ensure that this never happens again?" Maria straightened her shoulders, her supervisor's training finally kicking in as she recognized that this moment could either destroy her career or transform it into something meaningful. "We're going to implement mandatory bias training for all staff, create clear protocols for handling unusual situations, and establish an anonymous reporting system for guests who feel they've been treated unfairly. We're going to make this hotel a place where everyone feels welcome, regardless of their background or circumstances." "Excellent," Marcus said, his voice carrying approval that seemed to lift some of the tension from the air around them. And to ensure that these changes are implemented effectively, I'll be making a significant donation to fund diversity and inclusion training, not just here, but at hotels throughout the city. Sometimes the best response to prejudice is education, and the best response to exclusion is creating more opportunities for inclusion." The crowd that had gathered began to applaud, their clapping echoing through the marble lobby like thunder rolling across a clear sky. But Marcus raised his hand for silence, understanding that this moment was about more than just personal vindication or public recognition. "There's something else I want everyone here to understand," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the lobby. "Yesterday, when I was turned away from this hotel, I could have responded with anger. I could have demanded to speak to managers, threatened lawsuits, used my wealth and influence to punish the people who had wronged me. But that wouldn't have changed anything meaningful. It would have been about power, not about progress. He gestured toward Isabella, whose tears had stopped, but whose face still carried the weight of the lesson she'd learned. As instead, I chose to return today not to humiliate anyone, but to create an opportunity for growth, for learning, for the kind of change that happens when people understand not just what they did wrong, but why it was wrong, and how they can do better. Marcus walked to the fountain in the center of the lobby, its gentle splashing providing a soundtrack to his words. You see, true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or luxury cars or expensive suits. True wealth is measured in our ability to lift others up, to create opportunities for understanding, to turn moments of pain into catalysts for positive change. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a check, its amount visible to those close enough to see, a donation to the hotel's staff education fund that was larger than most people's annual salaries. This money will fund training programs, sensitivity workshops, and community outreach initiatives that will ensure every person who walks through these doors is treated with the dignity they deserve. Isabella stepped forward, her voice stronger now than it had been since the encounter began. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that I'll never forget this lesson. And I want to personally commit to being part of the solution, not part of the problem. Will you give me the chance to prove that I can do better? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown since entering the hotel. Isabella, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Change doesn't happen when we punish people for their mistakes. It happens when we give them the opportunity to learn from those mistakes and become better versions of themselves. He turned to address the crowd one final time, his voice carrying the weight of experience and the hope of possibility. Everyone here has witnessed something important today. You've seen how assumptions can hurt, how prejudice can wound, but also how understanding can heal and how education can transform. Take this lesson with you when you leave here. Remember it the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their appearance. Use it to create a world where everyone is seen for who they truly are, not just what they appear to be. As the crowd began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with the energy that comes from witnessing something transformative, Marcus approached the reception desk one final time. Isabella, I'd like to check into my suite now, if that's possible. Of course, Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice carrying a warmth and respect that was genuine rather than performed. And sir, thank you for giving me the chance to learn, to grow, to become someone better than I was yesterday. Marcus took the key card she offered, understanding that it represented more than just access to a hotel room. It was a symbol of the bridges that could be built when people chose understanding over anger, education over retribution, hope over despair. 6 months later, Marcus returned to the Grandview Hotel for a special event, the graduation ceremony for the first class of staff members who had completed the comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program that his donation had funded. The lobby was filled with hotel employees from across the city, their faces glowing with the pride that comes from genuine accomplishment and meaningful growth. Isabella Santos stood at the podium, no longer just a receptionist, but now the hotel's director of guest relations and inclusion, her transformation serving as proof that people could change when given the opportunity and support to do so. Her voice carried confidence and conviction as she addressed the assembled group. 6 months ago, I made a mistake that could have defined my career and my character, she said, her words carrying to every corner of the lobby. I allowed assumptions and prejudices to guide my actions, and in doing so, I hurt someone who deserved better. But instead of punishing me for that mistake, Mr. Thompson chose to turn it into an opportunity for learning and growth. She gestured toward Marcus, who sat in the front row with the quiet dignity that had characterized his response to the original incident. He taught me that true strength isn't about having power over others. It's about using whatever power you have to lift others up. He showed me that the best response to prejudice isn't anger, but education, and he demonstrated that the most powerful way to create change is to give people the tools and opportunity to become better versions of themselves. The applause that followed was different from the clapping that had echoed through the lobby 6 months earlier. This was the sound of a community celebrating not just individual achievement, but collective growth and shared commitment to creating a more inclusive and understanding world. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to mingle, sharing stories and celebrating their accomplishments, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A single incident of prejudice and assumption had been transformed into a catalyst for widespread change, affecting not just one hotel, but an entire network of hospitality establishments throughout the city. Isabella approached him as the evening wound down, her face glowing with the satisfaction that comes from meaningful work and genuine accomplishment. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to thank you again for believing in the possibility that people can change. This program has transformed not just how we treat our guests, but how we see ourselves and our role in creating a more inclusive world." Marcus smiled, understanding that this moment represented the true measure of success. Not the wealth he'd accumulated or the businesses he'd built, but the lives he'd touched and the positive changes he'd helped create. "And Isabella, you did the hard work of changing and growing. I just provided the opportunity. The real credit belongs to you and everyone else who chose to embrace that opportunity and become better." As he prepared to leave the hotel that night, Marcus paused in the lobby where it all began, the fountain still splashing gently in the background, the marble floors still gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. But something fundamental had changed in this space. It had been transformed from a place of exclusion into a symbol of inclusion, from a monument to prejudice into a testament to the power of education and understanding. The valet brought his car around, the same Rolls-Royce that had announced his return 6 months earlier. But now it felt different somehow, less like a symbol of wealth and more like a tool for creating positive change. As he drove through the city streets, Marcus thought about all the other Isabella Santos working in hotels and restaurants and shops throughout the world, people who might be carrying their own assumptions and prejudices, but who also carried the potential for growth and transformation. If this story of transformation and second chances has touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear about a time when you chose understanding over anger, or when someone gave you the opportunity to learn and grow from your mistakes. Share your experience in the comments below, because every story of positive change adds to the collective understanding that we can all do better when we choose compassion over condemnation. And if this ending has reminded you that the most powerful response to prejudice is education, and that the best way to create change is to give people the tools to become better versions of themselves, consider sharing this story with someone who might need that reminder today, because sometimes the most important transformations begin with a single act of grace in the face of injustice.